Still working on solving trig equations. This one's asking to solve it in the specified domain and to give a general solution. So the specified domain is this part. 0 is less than or equal to theta is less than 2 pi. So solve it between 0 and 2 pi, which you're pretty much always going to have to do anyway, even if it's just asking you for a general solution. And the equation here looks significantly more complicated than the ones we were doing last week. We have 5 sine theta plus 2 equals 1 plus 3 sine theta. But really, it's not that much different than what we were doing before. We just have to do some work first to get it to look like the ones we were doing last week. If I say let x equal sine theta, we're just looking for a way to simplify that equation. And so taking the trigonometry out of there is going to do that. When I rewrite the equation, so basically I'm substituting that x in wherever I see a sine theta. It becomes 5x plus 2 equals 1 plus 3x. And you probably know how to solve that, do you? What do you have to do to solve that? It's now a linear equation, so we just have to get the x by itself. We'll subtract 3x from both sides. Here and here, that becomes 2x. And I'll subtract 2. So 2x equals negative 1, or x equals negative 1/2. It's not finished yet. We have what x equals. X is equal to negative 1/2. But we're basically solving a system of equations here. We started out with one equation, but we turned it into a system by making that other little statement off to the side that x equals sine theta. So now I need to solve the x equals sine theta so I know what theta is. So now I can say sine theta equals negative 1/2. That you already know how to solve because that we were solving last week. Sine theta equals negative 1/2. So we're looking at the 1, 2, root 3 special triangle. Hypotenuse is 2. We want the angle that's opposite the 1 because sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So the reference angle is pi over 6. Reference angle is pi over 6. And because it's negative, we actually want to be in quadrants 3 and 4. That's where sine is negative. So I want the angles in quadrants 3 and 4 that have a reference angle of pi over 6. So those would be 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. And then it asks us for a general solution. So the general solution would just be 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6 plus or minus 2 pi n. 3 cos theta minus 1 equals cos theta plus 1. So this one I'm not going to do a substitution. We could do it the same by substituting. What would the substitution be if we were going to do it? We would replace the cos theta probably with an x. But I could just, probably for one like this, if I just do subtract cos theta from both sides instead of changing it to an x, then I get 2 cosine theta because I had 3 of them, subtract it 1. And then minus 1 equals 1. So add 1. 2 cos theta equals 2. And then divide by 2. So I get cos theta equals 1. Now I need to solve for theta. How am I going to get a 1? Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So if you look at the special triangles, they have hypotenuses of, well, even if you just think about it, you're never going to get a ratio of 1 to 1 for a side length, like one of the legs in the hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse has to be bigger. So we're not going to be able to use a special triangle. What do we have to do when we can't use a special triangle? Look at the points on the unit circle that are right on the axes, right? So if I draw that here, this point is 1, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, 0, negative 1. And remember, the points are cosine, sine. So we're looking for where cosine is equal to 1. So I guess it's only right here, right? That's the only spot where the x value is equal to 1. So theta is equal to, what would you say that angle is? 0. That's one possibility, right? I think we need to look at the domain here. Negative 2 pi and 0, right? Let me put those in order. Negative 2 pi, 0, and 2 pi, because we're looking between negative 2 pi and 2 pi. This is a little bit trickier because the equation to start with is a little more complex. So I think we will do that substitution. I'm going to say x is equal to cosine theta again. If I say x is equal to cosine theta, what do I replace the cosine squared theta with? X squared. Cosine squared theta actually means cosine theta squared. Like, I'll just write it there. This is the same thing. We just don't write it like that. We put the squared inside the cosine, but it just means cosine theta times cosine theta. So we're replacing cosine theta with x. We replace cosine squared with x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. What kind of equation do we have here? Quadratic, right. The other ones were both linear. This one is quadratic. To solve that quadratic equation, we're going to factor x squared minus x minus 2. So this will be x minus 2, x plus 1. Yes? So from there, then we have x equals 2 and x equals negative 1. Which means cosine theta equals 2 and cosine theta equals negative 1. So we have actually two equations to solve here. Cosine theta equals negative 1. Didn't we just do one almost like that? Did we do negative 1 or did we do 1? 1. So let's do that one first since it's fresh in our minds. Cosine theta equals negative 1. I'm going to look at the point. I want the point where the x value is equal to negative 1. So here, negative 1 and 0. So that has one solution between 0 and 2 pi. Actually, this is asking us for between 0 and 360. So we're going to answer in degrees. What would theta equal? 180 degrees. And that's the only one between 0 and 360. 0 and 360 is one complete rotation. And then we have cosine theta equals 2. Remember the last one, we couldn't use the special triangle because we could never get a 1-to-1 ratio. If we're looking at cosine, we're never going to get a 2-to-1 ratio of adjacent over hypotenuse, right? Because the hypotenuse has to be bigger than the adjacent. So what does that mean in the context of this problem? What's the biggest cosine value that you could get? 1. The one that's right, well, this one that we looked at before. 1 is the biggest, negative 1's the smallest. all of the other values are in between there. So cosine equals 2, there's no solution to that. No solution just to this part. So the actual answer to the problem is just this, theta equals 180 degrees.